Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is your host, Jordan Tremaine, and welcome to the Perspective Podcast, where we explore new thoughts, connect ideas, and offer perspectives that may change the way you think about a thing or two. And today, we're talking about something called depth inversion. Okay, so hey guys, hope your day is going well. I don't know what time of day or which day or what year you're listening to this, but I hope it catches you well. Every time I think about what year is this, I think about that movie Jumanji, where Robin Williams gets stuck in the game and then he comes out and he's like, "What year is it?" And that's always funny to me because he has like the big beard and he's dressed like he's like a jungle man and stuff. But anyways, a little bit of housekeeping. I recently decided it would be much easier for me to keep track of episodes if I stopped posting them in seasons. So as of now, I think this would be season 2, episode 15, but I'm going to scratch that and combine the episodes with season 1, stop having seasons, and this is going to be episode 33. And we're just going to go 33, 34, all the way on to infinity, which gives us, or me, the opportunity to have like the 100th episode, the 200th episode, the 1000th episode, and it's much easier that way. And also, I like it when you can say, in episode this, you talked about this. And so I think it's a better reference point rather than having seasons. So we're just going to go numerically. But anyways, today we're going to talk about something called a depth inversion. And I think a depth inversion is something that is good to know about or good to be aware of. And it reminds me a lot of this word specious, but specious, I feel, is not the most positively connotated word, and I think a depth inversion is kind of like a similar and also more positive version of the word specious. So before we get into this, I'm going to give you a definition. So specious is an adjective, and the first definition is superficially plausible, but actually wrong. And the second definition is misleading in appearance, especially misleadingly attractive. And so basically specious is kind of, on first glance, yeah, it looks good. But if you looked a little deeper or you checked under the surface or you pulled the rug up and you were like, okay, what's really under here? It's, all that glitters is not gold kind of thing, where now that I got a little more into this is not what I thought it was. Or, oh, that sounds really right. Oh, that's super correct because I didn't look at it too much. But now that I'm looking at it a little deeper, it's like, ooh, that's wrong. That's not good. We can't do that. And so I think the idea of something being specious or the possibility of something being specious is very relevant in the way that humans communicate with each other. I think a lot of times there's a desire, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad desire, but there's a desire for easily digestible information. And I think it can be attractive to want to say that because the information is easy to understand, it's true. But this idea of being specious is the part of it that's easy to understand is misleading. And once you get a little deeper into it, it stops being true, or it stops being what you thought it was. And so that's kind of a little preamble to today's episode on depth inversion. And depth inversion is a little bit different, but I think it's very similar to specious, and I'm probably going to throw that word out a couple of times. And to that, I think if this episode is interesting to you, there are some previous episodes. There's one on sensationalism, and one on virtual puzzle pieces that I think speak really well to the specious concept. So if you want to get into that, you can check out those episodes. I'm going to put the episode links or the episode references in the description, so don't feel like you got to write those down. But yeah, so on to the main course. And so I think the way I think about a depth inversion, the easiest way I can explain it to myself, at least, is martial arts. And I think each martial art is different, and I give respect to anybody that practices martial arts, and I'm not trying to say that all martial arts are the same, but martial arts have some similarities between them. Like, they're all forms of fighting. They all involve training and discipline and physical moves and stuff like that. And as far as I can tell, an interesting thing about martial arts is from the perspective of the person practicing martial arts, from the perspective of the martial artist, there can be a kind of progression. As you get better, things become different to you. And when you start in a martial art, so let's say you start in karate and you're a brand new karate guy. I think that's a white belt. Most of the time, or there's a good amount of the time, people want to join a martial art to learn how to fight or to gain power. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the motive or the reason for doing a martial art is for fighting prowess and to fight. And as you get more and more into it, I think the reason you do it changes, or the reason you get better changes, or as you get more into it, the idea of the martial art changes. And not to say that there's no fighting in martial arts once you get to a certain level, but I think once you pass a certain level, it stops being about fighting, and I think it starts being about other things like discipline and strategy and health and community, and it almost starts being a tool to not fight, which is interesting because in the beginning you learned how to do it to fight, but as you move towards the other side of it, or as you get more mature in it, it stops being a tool to fight, and it starts being the reason you don't have to fight, or the knowledge you know that teaches you why fighting is not the best option and helps give you enough power or enough skill to avoid the fight. That's that idea I'm calling a depth inversion. So the reason that I gave it that name is thinking about water. Like if you're in the ocean, it's like you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, so the depth is changing. You're getting more into a concept. You're learning more. You're getting more mature in it. And there's a point as you get deeper and deeper and deeper that it actually, the concept inverts and it becomes basically opposite. And in this case, I start on the surface with karate and I'm like, I want to be a fighter. I want to be the best fighter and to beat up all the guys and people and all that stuff. And, let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. And you're like, bam, bam, bam. But as you get deeper into it, I think it turns more into this internal journey, and it switches from wanting to fight and show off and win tournaments and stuff like that. And it switches to wanting to be self-disciplined, wanting to be mature, wanting to teach people in your community, wanting to resolve conflict without fighting. And to me, the perfect abstract visualization of this is, I forget which Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but they had to travel to somewhere that was impossible to get to, and what they ended up doing was flipping their boat upside down. And when they flipped their boat upside down, it put them in this reverse world, and then they were right side up in the reverse world. And that's to me what it's like. You go underwater enough to where you flip and then everything changes, because now that you've been down there, you've got enough experience, you know what's going on, or you have a better idea of what's going on. It's not what it seemed like when you first got into it. And that's kind of why I brought up that word specious. Because I think specious means superficially plausible, but actually wrong. That's the definition. And the reason I brought that up is because on the surface it seems like one thing, but as you get deeper and deeper into it, it's something different. And in the case with specious, it's it looks good on the surface, and you get under it and it's wrong. I'm not trying to say a depth inversion is about being wrong or right. I think it's about the motives and the perspectives, the way that you engage with something totally changing because you're more experienced with it. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. I think that's the one where if you don't know enough about something, you know a little bit, but not too much, you feel like an expert. And then there's a point where you learn enough about something to realize that you don't know anything, and it changes the way you deal with the subject because you no longer feel like an expert. And it's like that point where you cross over that hill, you get enough experience to change your perspective. I think that's the point of the depth inversion. It's like the inflection point on that graph, or the point where it switches from like positive to negative. And I think this concept, it's hopefully it's easy to understand with the examples that I already gave, with martial arts and with that Pirates of the Caribbean thing, which I think is such a good visual for this, like when you're thinking about it. But this concept, I think, appears in a lot of things, and especially in things that are typically hard for people to agree on. So like love. Love is something I think we all have some idea of, and I've never heard of somebody argue that love doesn't exist. I think most people think love exists, but I have heard a lot of people argue about what is love. And I think something interesting about a concept like love or like empathy or something like that is the more you get into it, I think it changes. Where in the beginning, with love, I think it's a lot about feelings, and in particular satisfying your own feelings and trying to create this system that satisfies your feelings. And you do that by satisfying the other person's feelings. And I think that is the really, really basic rudimentary idea of love. And that's kind of like and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody or tell anybody that they're in a certain place and I'm better than them or worse than them or whatever. These are my ideas. I'm sharing them with you guys, and I hope you can take what you think is good and then leave what you think is not for you. But I think more of like the middle school Valentine's Day card love is like, or puppy love is like, I'm giving you something in the hopes that I get my feelings validated or satisfied. I want that good feeling, like I give you roses and you give me a kiss on the cheek. I'm looking for that kiss on the cheek. And as you get older, or as you get more mature, I think love stops being about chasing feelings or satisfying other people's feelings, because sometimes I think we can get joy from other people being happy, and so we try to make other people happy to make ourselves happy. I think love starts being more about actions and about commitment and about like all the gross words that we don't like because they're too mature for us. Commitment and there's another one. It'll come to me later. But like making daily decisions to do something because that's what you decided to do, not necessarily because I feel like doing it or I'm going to get a good feeling out of it or it's going to make you feel a certain way. It's that I'm committed to this and I made a decision and this is what's going to happen. I'm going to support you even when I feel like crap. I'm going to talk with you and work this stuff out even if it makes me uncomfortable. And that is very different from the puppy love, because if the puppy love is all about happiness and satisfying your feelings, like I'm not going to support you when it feels bad, and I'm not going to talk to you when it feels bad, because that's the opposite of what I think love is. Now I think that you don't love me because you're trying to get me in a conversation where I have bad feelings, and the whole point of this is to have good feelings. But it like inverts when I think it gets over the feelings. And not to say that as you get more into love, the feelings disappear. I think feelings are very important. I just think it's not all about the feelings as you get more and more into love. But enough on that. That's kind of an example of this depth inversion idea that I'm trying to explain. And if that example doesn't work for you, it doesn't. It works for me. That's why I'm explaining it to you. But it doesn't work for everybody. All right, I can guess because people are different. So, sometimes I feel that to look at this concept from another angle, there can be a desire from certain people, conscious or subconscious, and I think it gets really interesting when it's subconscious, to keep things shallow because there's a risk of a depth inversion. So, like, you might have an intuition that things might change if you dig a little deeper into it. You might have an intuition that this is specious, that this is right because I haven't looked into it, and if I look into it, I'm going to be wrong. so I don't want to look into it. I want to keep that rug right there because I put some stuff under it, and I don't want anybody to see what's under that rug. I don't want to see, the closet is closed. I can't see the skeletons, and so nobody gets to know the secrets, and I can even hide stuff from myself. And I think it can be very disorienting to get inverted, to get flipped upside down. It's kind of like the theme song to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, because he got all turned upside down. But this idea, I think, the moment where you pass over that hill in the Dunning-Kruger curve, or the moment where you start inverting because you're learning enough, or the moment you start transitioning in the specious progression from superficially plausible to actually wrong because you've learned enough to realize that it's wrong, that could be very jarring. That could be very disorienting. That could be very painful and embarrassing. And to do that in public can be even worse. So I think understanding that depth inversions in certain concepts exist can be really good to help us navigate the storms and hold ourselves together during the inversion. Because like in the Pirates of the Caribbean, while they were flipping upside down, everything was going crazy. Everybody in the boat was like, oh, and they were underwater and all this stuff. And then at the end, it was like, quiet and sunny, and they were just on the water because they finished the inversion. But going through the inversion is not comfortable for anybody. And I would caution against trying to force people to go through an inversion. If somebody is content in their shallow or their kind of beginner knowledge of a subject, you don't need to force them to go and really learn what's the real thing. But you also don't need to pretend and humor them and act like what they're talking about is a real thing. Because I can understand people not wanting to get dragged underwater and flipped upside down, regardless of if you think it's good for them or not. So in that, I think the first two suggestions that I made about previous podcasts for sensationalism and virtual puzzle pieces, those talk a lot, I think, about the idea of specious. And then going into a depth inversion, I think the podcasts on logic aliasing and the ability to appreciate are relevant here, because if you are trying to connect with somebody and you've experienced a depth inversion and they haven't, and you're trying to talk to them about it, you guys might fundamentally misunderstand each other because your concept of the thing you're talking about or trying to connect with is at different depths. And so your submarines are swimming at different depths, and they totally miss each other when they pass each other. And then with the ability to appreciate, it's like, if you haven't been in it enough to be able to be flipped and turned upside down, you might have you might not have a perspective that is conducive to understanding what I'm talking about at the level that I'm talking about it. You may have needed to be flipped in order to understand what I'm talking about. You may have needed to get your heart broken before you can really empathize with what I'm talking about. You may have needed to practiced enough martial arts to know that it's not about fighting. And I can't talk to you about it until you've been there. Like, for instance, in sports, I've played some sports, and I've played some sports to a decently high level. And I've never been a pro athlete, but I played on varsity sports. I did a lot of rock climbing. I've ridden my bike a lot, and I've gone to such a level with sports. And this is not me bragging. I'm just trying to explain the concept that when I talk about sports to somebody who is not physically active or has not been pushing their body to the extent that I've pushed it to, and they could have done it in any sport. This doesn't matter what sport you are. It's just about pushing yourself physically and the why and the motivation behind it, and the getting hurt but still practicing because you're driven to do it even though you're hurt and all that kind of stuff. If you've never been through that, it seems kind of stupid that you would ride your bike for 200 miles in one day. It doesn't make sense. You don't understand why. But if you're the kind of person who's done something like that, or actually done a real triathlon or ran a marathon, you understand on a deeper level why you're doing it. It's not about punishing your body. It's about getting an experience. It's about testing yourself. It's about what I call meditation. When I go on really long bike rides, it forces me to focus so much. It's like I'm meditating for like 8 hours, and then I feel so like calm and free for the next few days. So it's hard for me to explain that to people who haven't done it. It's kind of like I think some people say like trying to talk to people about the experience of being on acid is really difficult if you've never been on acid. So there's that idea of you can't appreciate it until you've been through that inversion. And then lastly, in this idea of depth inversion, we went over what a depth inversion is. We compared it to the word specious. We talked about what happens when people haven't been through a depth inversion, or when two people talking, one has been through a depth inversion, one hasn't within a certain concept, and then also trying not to force people to invert themselves, to don't flip people upside down without them consenting. I think consent is a really, really great thing to have. And lastly, one thing that's interesting, I think this is very, very interesting, is I think that we can get caught up in trying to say like, oh, I made it, or oh, I've been through it, so I know what's up. I'm on the other side. I got out of the Matrix. And the Matrix, I think, is a depth inversion. Like, you think all this is real, and then you get out of the Matrix, and oh, everything's backwards, and it's not real because you're out of the Matrix, and all this stuff happened. If relating to the movie The Matrix. But I think depth inversions are more like there's the Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis. In the last book, called The Last Battle, like, all the dudes are fighting. Like, the good guys versus the bad guys are fighting. And then the good guys win at the end. And Aslan, who is a lion, like, I remember reading this and I was like, okay, he's a lion that could talk and do all this stuff. Okay, that's great. They destroy Narnia from all this fighting. And they're like, oh no, we destroyed Narnia. Where are we going to live? And then Aslan, he's like, oh, it's chill. Aslan, the lion, who doesn't wear any clothes, basically goes into his pocket and pulls out like a snow globe. And he's like, look, I have another Narnia that I've been holding in my pocket, just in case we destroyed this Narnia. And it's even bigger once you get inside. So everybody like hops into the snow globe of Narnia, and they get this brand new Narnia. And it turns out inside of every snow globe is another snow globe. So like there's smaller Narnias within Narnias that get bigger when you get into them. And I think depth inversions don't end. You go to a certain level and it flips on you, and you've inverted, and you've learned something, you've matured, and the idea changes, and you go further and it inverts again in a different way, and it gives you a different perspective. And now you've had two inversions, so you see it in a different way, because that's more perspectives. And as you get deeper and deeper into something, it switches and it inverts in different ways over and over and over. So you can get so deep into something that it's hard for you to really talk to other people about, because it's not just that you're deep into it, it's that you've been flipped and you've been oriented at certain ways because you've been so deep. And so it's about the orientation, the experience of orientations, and the depth. And just trying to explain the depth to somebody that hasn't been at these orientations, that doesn't have the ability to operate these different perspectives, the translation may become very difficult or impossible, and they might have to experience it in order to appreciate it, but they may not have enough time to experience it. They may not be interested in doing all the work it takes to experience it, and it's okay. They're different. And sometimes it can be really, really tough for somebody that's been through a lot and learned something. They've been to the top of the mountain and they've seen something really, really beautiful, but it takes all this work and all this inverting and all this learning and maturing and all this stuff, and to go back and try to explain this really great thing that you learned that's so beautiful, like the allegory of the cave, and everybody, they can't get on level with you because they haven't been through the journey, and it's super frustrating, and you might even sound condescending when you're trying to give them something that you think is beautiful, that you worked really hard on, because they are not, like in the Pirates of the Caribbean, they're not even in the same world that you are. And so, like when they went like upside down on the boat to go to the other world, like you're in a totally different world. So trying to talk to them, it's like, Not that you're better than them, not that you're worse than them. You're just in a different space. You're in a different place. You're at a different orientation, and you have different experience. So it could be hard to empathize. It could be hard for them to empathize, for them to see where you're coming from, and that's okay. So this has been the Perspective episode on depth inversion. I think this is a really fun idea for me, and I love this idea because if it's in your mind and it happens to you, you can feel it happening if you're consenting to letting it happen. If it's happening to you in a way where you're not being forced to have it happen to you, it's like this feeling and you like, oh my gosh, and like the concept matures and it flips and you're like, whoa, and it's just like this chain of dominoes gets like slapped down, because once a concept flips, and if you let it flip in your mind and you let the flip kind of resonate in your mind, and now that it's different, what does that mean for all these other things in my mind? It's like all these dominoes get tipped and all these ideas get flipped in all these ways, and you're just like, whoa, this is so crazy. And it's quite an experience if you've ever had it. So I hope you do experience it. If not, I'm not going to force you to have it, but I think it's a fun one if you're ready for it and you know what's going on. But this has been Jordan Tremaine with the Perspective podcast episode on depth inversion, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.